Hello everyone. Let's jump straight into a topic that is quietly transforming service management, service level management, and how it's moving beyond traditional SLAs into what we now call experience level agreements or XLAs. In formal IT language, service level management ensures that service performance is agreed, monitored, and managed against defined targets to meet business needs. In very simple words, this means agreeing on what good service looks like and making sure we deliver it. You've probably seen this at the office. 99.9% uptime, 4-hour response time, resolution within 2 days. I once worked with a company that proudly met every SLA target, yet users were still unhappy. Stay with me here. Hitting the S doesn't always mean delivering satisfaction. So now that we understand traditional service level management, you might be wondering where SLAs fall short. And that brings us right into the limits of metrics. Service level agreements or SLAs focus on measurable performance indicators such as availability, response time, and resolution speed. In simple terms, this means measuring what we can count easily. Let's break this down together. If a service is available 99.9% of the time, the SLA is technically met, even if the 0.1% outage happened during a critical sales event. I once saw a team celebrate meeting SLA targets while business leaders complained about poor support experiences. You've probably seen that disconnect between technical success and business frustration. Stay with me here. Metrics alone do not capture perception. So now that we understand the gap between metrics and experience, you might be wondering what XLAs actually measure. And that leads us into experience. Experience level agreements focus on how users perceive service performance rather than only technical outputs. Formally, XLAs measure sentiment, satisfaction, and emotional response to service delivery. In very simple words, this means measuring how people feel about the service. I once worked with an organization that introduced simple feedback questions after every support interaction. The insights were eye-opening. Technical resolution was fast, but communication quality was inconsistent. You've probably seen how tone and empathy matter as much as speed. Stay with me here. Experience shapes trust. So now that we understand what XLAs measure, you might be wondering how to combine SLAs and XLAs effectively. And that brings us into balanced measurement. Balanced service measurement integrates traditional SLAs with experience-based metrics to create a holistic view of service quality. In simple terms, this means combining S with feelings. Let's break this down together. You track uptime, but you also track user satisfaction. You measure response time, but you also measure clarity of communication. I once helped a service team introduce experience surveys alongside SLA dashboards. The combination changed leadership conversations entirely. You've probably seen how broader visibility improves decisions. Stay with me here. Balance creates alignment. So now that we understand balanced measurement, you might be wondering how to define meaningful experience metrics. And that leads us into co-creation. Defining meaningful XLAs requires co-creation with stakeholders. In governance terms, service expectations must be defined collaboratively to reflect business priorities. In very simple words, this means asking users what matters to them. I once worked with a finance department that valued reliability over speed. Meanwhile, the marketing team valued rapid response above everything else. You've probably seen how different stakeholders define good service differently. Stay with me here. Experience is contextual. So now that we understand co-creation, you might be wondering how data collection supports XLA measurement. And that brings us into analytics. Experience analytics combines survey data, sentiment analysis, and operational metrics to evaluate service perception. In simple words, this means turning feedback into insights. Let's break this down together. Tools can analyze chat transcripts, survey responses, and behavioral patterns to detect satisfaction trends. I once saw a service team discover that users were frustrated not with technical issues, but with lack of status updates. You've probably seen how small communication gaps create large dissatisfaction. Stay with me here. Data reveals hidden experience drivers. So now that we understand analytics, You might be wondering how leadership shifts when XLAs enter the picture. And that leads us into accountability. When organizations adopt XLAs, accountability expands beyond technical teams to include communication, empathy, and customer engagement. In very simple words, service becomes everyone's responsibility. I once saw a service review meeting where instead of discussing only uptime percentages, the team discussed customer journey pain points. That conversation felt very different. You've probably seen how experience-based discussions humanize service delivery. Stay with me here. Culture evolves when experience matters. So now that we understand accountability, the final piece is seeing how XLAs drive continual improvement. Ultimately, moving from SLAs to XLAs represents a shift from performance-based thinking to experience-based thinking. In formal IT language, service value is realized not only through operational efficiency, but through stakeholder satisfaction and perceived outcomes. In very simple words, it's not enough for services to work, they must feel good to use. I've seen organizations transform their service reputation simply by listening more carefully to user experience signals. When SLAs ensure reliability and XLAs ensure satisfaction, service level management becomes truly value driven. So now that we have mastered how service level management evolves beyond SLAs into experience levels, you can clearly see that the future of service excellence lies not just in meeting targets, but in exceeding expectations. Well, that brings us right into our next chapter.